Rolling? Okay, this is September 17, 2004, and we're doing an oral history interview with Herbert Arenz. Where is your home now?
Our home now is Carmel, Indiana.
And how long have you been there?
1 year.
1 year. And you're here with your wife,
Mm-hmm.
and her name is Catherine, but you call her
Kay.
Kay. And tell me a little bit about where you were born and when.
Well, I was born in Wasson Flats, Montana, which is no more. 6 April 22.
1922.
Yeah.
How long did you live in Montana?
Well, about 10 years, and then we moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where my father was from, and we stayed there until a year ago.
What was life like as a young boy in Montana? What did you do?
Well, in summertime I walked 3 miles to school each way. In wintertime I stayed at my grandmother's, which was only half as far, 1.5 miles each way.
And a lot of snow.
Lots of snow and lots of cold.
Yeah.
I can remember seeing the thermometer at 60 below.
That's not the wind chill.
No, that was before wind chill.
Okay. Tell me about your parents. What did they do?
Well, my father homesteaded in Montana, and my mother's parents homesteaded about 1.5 miles away. And they met and married, and my father became an invalid in 1928, and then in 32 we moved back to Wisconsin.
And you were in junior high and high school in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I was well, I started in the 5th grade and went through high school in La Crosse.
Now, do you remember what you were doing on December 7th, 1941?
I certainly do. I worked for a newspaper, and I was out delivering papers to the stores. If they would run out of papers, they would call and we'd take them more. And I was delivering the papers on 7 December.
That was Sunday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
How did you hear?
Well, I walked into a store and somebody had been listening to the radio and they told me about it.
And you were about 19 years of age
Mm-hmm.
at that time. Did you know what that meant for your future?
Well, the next day I went to the recruiting office and volunteered my services. And they said, look at the car on the street and tell me what it is without your glasses. So I did. I couldn't tell them. And the recruiter says, do you have a sister? I says, yes, 6 years younger. He says, well, after they draft her, we may take you. But he lied a lot because in 1942, they took me.
Now, you went into the Army. Could you have gone into any other branch of the service?
Yes, I was fortunate. We got down to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and we were lined up in a block-long line of soldiers, and every 10th one went to the Navy, and they picked out some for the Marines, but I was lucky I was Army.
And this was in 1942.
Mm-hmm. October of 42.
So where did you report for duty?
Camp Campbell, Kentucky.
Now, you were already married at this time.
Yes.
When did you guys marry?
June 20th of 42.
So you were just brand new, newly married.
Yep.
Do you have any second thoughts about marrying before you went to the war?
No, I figured if I was killed, she'd get my big $10,000.
So you had been married just a few months when you reported to Fort Campbell. What was life like at Fort Campbell?
Well, Fort Campbell had been newly opened at that time. I can remember the streets were either 3 inches of mud or 3 inches of dust. And we took our basic there, our individual training there. On December 7th of 42, I was at a movie. I came back to the barracks to find that my father had died. And the Red Cross had a ticket for me and a pass. Away I went.
Now, you went back forth from Wisconsin by train or by bus?
By
or?
train.
By train. So you went home for your father's funeral
Mm-hmm.
and then went back to Fort Campbell.
Right.
And your training was in the artillery, not in infantry and that sort of
No, artillery.
Okay. And what sort of things did they train you to do?
Well, we started out, we had no artillery. I can remember we put a 2x4 over one of the few Jeeps we had, and that was an artillery piece. And, we did surveys, we did trig, and, we had to learn every weapon in the Army, anti-aircraft, tank destroyer, and everything the Army had at that time.
Now, how did you keep in touch with your wife while you were at Fort Campbell? You write to her?
Daily letter.
A daily letter. Does she keep those letters?
No, she didn't, but I'll bet money she can tell you my serial number today.
Saw it quite a few times.
Yes.
Now, would you ever get to talk to her on the phone?
No.
No
Mm-mm.
long-distance phone
No.
connections there?
No.
Well,
I suppose if we had money we could have, but
cost money.
Being a poor E1, there was, by the time we paid $7 for insurance and $22 for her to get an allotment, another $6 for my mother to get an allotment. That was it.
Now, what was your salary as an E1 in 1942?
$50.
$50
per
a month.
Mm-hmm.
And when you went to Europe, you got little combat pay.
Mm-hmm.
How much was that?
I don't remember.
Okay. How long did you spend at Fort Campbell?
We were there until September of 43 when we went to maneuvers in southern Tennessee. We were there until Thanksgiving time when we moved to Abilene, Texas for training.
Had you spent any time in the South before going to
No.
Tennessee? What was that like for a Wisconsin, Montana boy?
Well, we were surprised that it got as cold as it did.
Uh-huh.
And surprised that we had snow.
Uh-huh.
I can remember when it got cold, many of the guys would stand behind the tanks to get the heat from the exhaust until they started dropping like flies.
Carbon
And it
monoxide.
didn't take long to figure out it was better to be cold than dead.
And you were in Tennessee how long then?
Well, from October of 42 till Thanksgiving time of 43.
And then you got on a train and you headed west.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you remember the first time coming into Abilene?
I don't know.
Because you stopped right out here at the station, and then somehow, did they take you by truck down to Barkley?
They must have taken us in cattle cars.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what Camp Barkley looked like to you.
Well, it was pretty primitive, really. Our barracks were off the ground on cement blocks periodically. There was probably 8 or 10 cement blocks around the bottom. And the floors were plywood. The walls were plywood. And the wind used to blow dust through the walls and through the floor. And we had heaters in the building where you could burn your nose and freeze your butt, or vice versa.
So you were in the Wild West, weren't you?
Yes, we were. And I never thought that I would ever return. Now that my son is living outside of Fort Worth, we come 3 or 4 times a year and enjoy it.
Now, now you were married, so you didn't go to the dances and so forth, but what did you do for fun when you weren't actually being trained?
Well, we didn't do much, sit around and read if we had something to read.
Did you leave the base, come into town, or?
Well, when she was down here, yes.
So she came down here and lived here in Abilene?
Yes, during the summer when she was not teaching.
Did you have to live on the training facility?
No, I lived with her in town when we weren't in the field.
Where did you live in Abilene?
Tell them.
On Elm Street.
On Elm Street. That's one of these north-south streets right over
Could
here.
be.
Yeah. And now, did your wife have a job here in town?
No.
Okay. And how long were you at Camp Barkley?
Well, from Thanksgiving of '43 until August of '44.
All right. Then you were going to go to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And did you go through New York?
We certainly did. We went out through Camp, the heck was the name of that? It'll come to me.
And you rode by train back to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And then you spent a few days there before you got on the ship?
Yeah, yeah. Some of the guys were fortunate enough to go into town. However, we were not to mention what division or anything, but the guys that came back said the 12th Armored is moving to Europe. The people in New York knew more about our move than we did.
What were your feelings then? Did you dread going to Europe at that time?
No, I think we were all too young and dumb to realize that people got hurt.
And everybody had a strong patriotic feeling about the war?
I think so, yeah. In fact, the first man of our battery that got killed in Germany was a young, last surviving son that did not have to go overseas. He signed a waiver to go over, and he was the first one killed.
Now explain, in those days you could have an exemption for certain hardships, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And so if you were, if you had brothers and sisters killed and so forth, that would exempt you from
going overseas.
Active service.
No, he's still active in the States.
Oh, but just
yeah,
from going overseas.
Yeah.
What was the boat ride to England like?
Well, 10 or 11 days of sitting in the bottom hold and hearing the trash cans go off as they tried to get the subs that were playing around in our convoy.
That was really a very dangerous time in the North Atlantic.
It was.
Lots of ships didn't make it.
And especially scary for a guy like me that couldn't swim.
Which is another reason not to go in the Navy.
Right.
So then you disembarked in London, in England?
Yes.
And how long were you there?
Oh, we were at Windmill Hill for, I don't know, probably a month. And there we were lucky we had running water. But it would have been nicer if the water would have been running in pipes instead of through our tents. But we
so
had
it
no
rained a lot.
Yeah, it did. And the water ran down through the middle of the tent. That's where we were issued the killer sleeping bags. Many of the guys got trapped in them and couldn't figure out how to get out in time for reveille or so on.
Tell me about the food that you had at Camp Barkley or different Fort Campbell or whatever.
The food was good. I got a little tired of the mutton in Camp Barkley, You could smell it coming in from the field, and immediately you knew that cow was not going to be your favorite. But I guess mutton was better than nothing.
Yeah. And then you tell me about the sea rations that you had back in those days.
Well, I was actually a chow hound and enjoyed my sea rations and my, what were the other rations? The ones in the box.
Mm-hmm.
C was in the can, huh? K rations.
K
yeah.
rations, right. Now you how did you get over then to the continent?
Well, we loaded into ships and sailed across the mighty channel and landed in France.
And you remember what the date was that you got there?
No, I don't.
That would have been in 44 or?
Yeah.
Yeah. And by that time, did you have a pretty clear idea how the fate of war was going? Did it look like we were going to win, or was it still pretty iffy?
Well, I think it was still iffy. We had our foothold in France, but we were making gains, and after all, Americans don't quit until the end.
What was the reception like in France?
Well, we didn't really see many French people. I remember we spent one night or a couple of nights in a barn, sleeping in the hay where the rats were as big as cats. And we took turns staying awake night with a carbine so that when they would come running out, we could shoot them before they got to the sleepers.
Now, were you still writing to Kay every day?
I tried to every day, yep.
And how long would it take a letter to get back to her, and then you hear back from her?
Oh, gosh. Well, it depended on the mail service, probably 3 weeks or a month.
Uh-huh. And your family back home followed closely the war by newspaper and radio,
Right.
and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then tell me what you did after you got to France.
Well, we moved up to Looneyville, and A Battery, Gun 2, fired the first round against the enemy for the 12th Armored Division in World War II.
And when was that?
I think 5 December.
And the real intense battle was December and January
Right.
of 44, 45.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what it was like to be in battle. You'd never been in battle for real.
No.
What was that like?
Well, I don't know. When we were busy, we didn't actually think about being in the war. My job was to get the shells out onto the enemy, and when I wasn't doing that, I was probably sleeping.
Now, you guys, would you stop at night, or would you keep traveling at night?
It depended.
Uh-huh.
If the infantry was on the move, we moved at night. If the infantry stopped and took this little town to bed down in, we would stop.
Now, you were from Montana and used to the cold. What was it like over there in the winter?
Well, the cold in combat boots was much different than the cold in Montana.
Because you didn't have any places any barns to stay in most of the time, that sort of thing.
No, in France. When we moved into Germany the 24th of December, we were one of the few trips in Germany we moved into houses.
Now, were the civilians afraid of you, or did they keep their distance?
I don't think they were afraid. They knew that the Americans weren't going to harm them. And we'd move in and take over a house and say you had 2 hours to get out or an hour to get out. And most of the guys would make a deal with a lady of the house to do our laundry and so on and so forth, so they never had us so good. 'Cause
Was there a low point for you in the war that you really felt this is about as bad as it's going to get?
oh, I suppose when it's real cold and we're sitting in a position for 2 or 3 days, yeah,
Pretty discouraging.
yeah.
Now, did you make some good friends over there? Were they the same people that you knew here at
They
Camp
were the
Barkley?
same people that we trained with.
Who were some of those people?
Well, Doc Syrian, who died a couple of years ago, worked with me in fire control. The two of us took turns figuring out. Tommy Moorhead, who ended up as a tank commander. His wife and my wife stayed together in the same house.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we, you know, in 3.5 years you become pretty good friends, especially when you know that my butt depends on him and his depends on me.
Mm-hmm. Now, where were you when the war ended?
We were down south of Munich. We had taken Landsberg prison camp, and then we were over to Munich. We liberated a couple of our FOs that were taken in Herlesheim. They were waiting for us at the prisoner of war camp in Munich. They said we knew you'd come. And then we were down south of Munich.
Now, you mentioned that you had liberated a prison camp that was a pretty sad story.
Yes, we were driving down the road near Landsberg. We got a fire mission. We prided ourselves on getting a fire mission and having the first round out within 2 minutes. So someone looked at the map and said there's an open field over here on the right. So we pulled off the road, heading for this open field, and right before we got to it, we saw this barbed wire enclosure. It had, probably 30 or 40 huts that were built down into the ground with the top of the hut above ground. And the hut nearest the gate was smoking and terrible odor. It seems that the Germans knew we were coming, so they herded all the live prisoners that they could find into this particular hut, boarded the doors and windows shut, and set it on fire.
Now, these were American soldiers?
No, these were Polish, yeah, it was a concentration camp of not Jewish, but political prisoners from other countries.
Now, did any of them survive that?
Very few. As we walked through the gate, a pair of arms went around our legs, and they said, American. It seems that the people that died during the night, it was the duty of the other prisoners to bring them out and lay them on the curb in front of the building. And about every 3 days, they would send a wagon down to pick up the dead bodies. And they took these dead bodies out behind the camp where there was a railroad track. And these dead bodies were stacked like cordwood along the railroad track. But they had all starved to death. There were probably 70, 80 pounds of bones.
Then Now, about that time, then you heard that the war was coming to a close.
No,
That was
no,
after that.
we didn't. Yeah, it was after that.
How did you hear that Hitler was dead? That Germany was defeated?
I don't remember. I guess it came over the radio, but I don't.
Now, did you have access to the Stars and Stripes?
Oh yes.
So you kept up by
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then, how did you feel when you found out that the war in Europe had come to an end?
Well, we had a bottle of scotch in our trailer that had been placed there when we went overseas, and we killed it.
And that was in June of 45?
45, right.
How?
May, I think.
May of
Yeah.
45. How long did it take you then to get back home?
Well, I went to the 1st Armored Division, but they separated us by points. And I went
It's
to the
based on how many points you'd accumulated.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And the fathers that had children were each given 5 points for each child. And we had no kids, so I took my turn. We went to the 1st Armored, and then they split up according to points and sent us to the 2nd Armored. In September, the Army, in all of its wisdom, sent the 2nd Army, or the 2nd Armored, to Le Havre to come home. They sent our ships to Marseille. So needless to say, our ships were up here and we were down here. So they sent us replacement ships in January. And January 20th, we headed home. I went to Fort Chardon, Illinois, and received my discharge on 6th February, and that was it.
And you went back to Wisconsin.
Went back to Wisconsin.
Now, how do you think the war changed you? Because you were quite young, 19 years of age, at the beginning of the war, and you were only about 26 or so when you got out.
25. I guess 25, 24.
How do you think that experience affected you?
Well, I think the experience was good. I'm basically a nosy person, so I managed to get into London and see a lot of the sights. And I saw and enjoyed the various things that we saw in Europe.
Have you been back?
Many times.
How is that, going back with those memories that you had and so forth?
Well, as I say, I enjoy each trip to Germany more than I did the first trip, because no one's shooting at me now.
Now, you know some of the people you meet over there were shooting at you. What's your feelings toward Germans today? Do you still have...
I have relatives over there. I have a good friend in Wisconsin who was in the German army and came over and was in the reserve with me after the war. He is also a 30-year Army veteran. We both draw our pensions. In fact, he draws Social Security from Germany plus U.S. But no, I have no animosity towards the Germans. In fact, we have several friends over there, as well as relatives. And we enjoy Germany very much.
Now, you stayed in the military then after...
I stayed in the reserve.
Uh-huh.
I went to Korea, did my tour over there, and back home to the reserve. And at age 60, they said, "Get out of here, you old man," and gave me my pension.
Now, what was your job other than in the reserves? What did you do for your career?
Well, I retired from Fort McCoy as a Department of Army civilian. And I was the DRC there, Director of reserve components
Uh-huh.
at Fort McCoy. So I guess I've been close to the Army from 1942 till 1987. 45 years.
Now, you and Kay had children after you got back.
We have two, yes.
And tell me about them.
Well, our son John lives here in Texas, and my daughter Mary Beth lives in Carmel, Indiana. A year ago, the children decided we were old and senile and should live close to one of them, so we moved to Indiana.
Indiana.
Yeah.
And you live in what city now?
Carmel.
In Carmel?
That's a suburb of Indianapolis.
Indianapolis.
Well,
Yes.
I'd like to know about Mary Beth's career.
Yeah.
Yes, my daughter is a 20-year veteran of the Army. Her husband is a 22-year veteran of the Army.
Uh,
And John is a police officer.
Yeah.
oh, in Fort Worth.
In
Colleyville.
Colleyville.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel that the country as a whole appreciated the service that you and your fellow soldiers?
I think they did, yes.
So
Yes.
you felt like your service was appreciated and recognized
Yeah,
and so forth?
I do, really. And I think they appreciated us in Korea.
Uh-huh.
However, in Vietnam, that was a different
Yeah.
attitude,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure about this one.
Yeah. Now, have you been to the World War II Memorial
No, we haven't.
in Washington?
No.
Is there anything else that I need to get into?
I don't think of anything I haven't covered.
You've been to quite a few of the 12th Armored reunions.
Mhm.
Tell me what you get from those and how you feel about those.
Well, it's just the camaraderie of the people that we served with. There are two other people from A battery here, and we're getting fewer and fewer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when the kids were little, we took them along. This was our vacation.
Oh, okay. Very good.
And we took them along. And I think that's why John was interested in
Yes.
doing the interview.
Right. And tell us your feeling about the museum.
Well, I think it's nice. I only hope we can afford it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it should be good for the upcoming generations to
Right.
have some idea of what war is like. And
Now, did your children have a lot of interest in what you did in the war? Did you talk much to them about it?
no, not particularly. I have written a story of my life, starting with my birth, and in that is about a 50-page story of my war experiences. And I figure when my grandchildren are 50, 60 years old, they may be interested in
Right.
hearing what happened.
Right. And a copy of that is here at the museum.
The war part of it is,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Very good. Well, Herbert, I sure appreciate your letting us interview you. And is there anything else that you'd like to mention, or?
No, just an old gravel agitator, I guess.
Well, we appreciate your letting us talk to you, and we appreciate your service to your country.
Well, thank you.